In some ways, uh, this is something that's long been brewing, but it's a surprise that it occurred, and it occurred right now. So most of these allegations are between 10 and 4 years old, and are nothing new to everyone in the Texas legislature. But in part because the Attorney General requested that the legislature pay for his whistleblower settlement, they became a subject of investigation. That, combined with the antagonistic relationship between the House leadership and some more conservative Republicans, I think has led to us where we are today with support for the impeachment of Attorney General Ken Paxton. Now, Paxton is somebody who I think most Republican elites would like to see leave office, if not by impeachment, by resignation. But at the same time, he's someone who, as recently as May of 2022, won 2/3 of the vote in the Republican primary. And he enjoys very strong favorability ratings among the individuals who vote in the Republican primaries and effectively determine which representatives go to Austin and which ones don't from the majority of the districts that are Republican.
I've been hearing and seeing, words like historic, unprecedented, shock, bandied about this afternoon. What's your, 1 or 2 word reaction to the news?
I think it is a major surprise. Not that Paxton is, none of the allegations are surprises at all. The fact that they're moving for impeachment and they're doing so in the waning days of the legislative session are somewhat of a surprise. I think it's part timing by the House. It's also, what's interesting about all of this is it's not clear what the House's end game is until we know what Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and Governor Greg Abbott think. Because if the Lieutenant Governor is not supportive of impeachment, then Paxton will be exonerated if it makes it to the Senate. It's only, I think, if the Lieutenant Governor comes down on the side of those who want to impeach the Attorney General that there may be a prospect of Paxton actually being impeached from office.
If you're handicapping it, how do you see this play out in the next few days?
Until I see Governor Greg Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick openly come out in favor of impeachment, I'm going to say that the odds are until I see Governor Greg Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick openly come out in favor of impeachment, I think the probability that Ken Paxton is actually impeached is low. On the other hand, if Abbott, Patrick, and a host of other Republican leaders decide to cut bait on the Attorney General, then we could be looking at an impeachment during the months of the summer. However, all that said, I think the most likely scenario is that even if the House approves articles of impeachment, that the Senate, when it holds the trial, exonerates the Attorney General, unless Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick makes the decision that now is the time for Texas Republicans to jettison the spoiled and excess baggage that represents Ken Paxton. He's an embarrassment for Texas Republicans, and he's someone who I think they would like to see out of office, but I don't think many Texas Republicans want to be seen as the people pushing him out of office, given his high popularity among Republican primary voters, who at the end of the day are the ones who still control the levers of power in Texas by determining who wins the Republican primary, which in turn determines who controls the government in Austin.
The one thing I saw that kind of raised some eyebrows here in the newsroom is, this is a committee of 5 that, approved this move forward. It was three Republicans, 2 Democrats that voted in favor unanimously. So there are some Republicans that clearly are ready to be done, right?
Oh, no, I think behind the scenes, I think an overwhelming majority of Republicans would love to see Ken Paxton out of office. The question is, how many of them are willing in a public vote to support articles of impeachment and then the impeachment of the Attorney General, knowing full well that they're inviting a very strong primary challenge to them in March of 2024. The more people like Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and Governor Greg Abbott get behind the impeachment, the less political risk they'll be taking. But if the Lieutenant Governor and the governor remain silent, it's going to be very difficult for many Texas Republicans to cross the line and vote to impeach the Attorney General, simply because they know in doing so, they're inviting a robust primary against them in March of 2024, when Republicans will be voting to determine who represents a large majority of the state, because at the end of the day, all but about 5 of the House Republicans are in safe Republican districts that are determined solely by the Republican primary. And even those other 5 need to worry about winning the primary to go on to their competitive general election. In the Texas Senate, every single Republican senator is in a safe Republican district, meaning their electoral fate is determined exclusively by Republican primary voters.
Gotcha. I think that sort of covers my big questions. What I was going to ask you, and this is probably a little less for TV, but more just for help guiding us. What does this process look like over the next 3-4 days, as we close in on the end of the session and we start talking about, is there a special session? Like, can you just walk me and through that?
Sure. So the way in a regular session, this can come up at any time. And voting the articles of impeachment in the House theoretically could come up as early as tomorrow or well, probably not as early as tomorrow, but well, maybe as early, but the articles of impeachment could, in theory, come before the House as early as Friday or Saturday. However, the last day they can be voted on would be Sunday. That said, the one time that both the House and the Senate can call themselves into special session is on issues of impeachment. So the House can quite easily, if it wants to, call a session for Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday and effectively review, debate, and vote on the articles of impeachment. Then the Senate then would have the option of either holding the trial or not holding the trial. The difficulty for the lieutenant governor is that if you don't hold the trial, then until such time as you do hold a trial, Paxton is out of office, because the moment a single article of impeachment is approved in the House, then the Attorney General is essentially suspended and therefore is unable to serve as Attorney General until such time that they're either convicted or exonerated in the Senate. So I would assume, much of what happens to Paxton and his fate will depend on what Dan Patrick and Republicans in the Senate want to do. If Dan Patrick and the other senators feel that now is the time to essentially jettison themselves of one of their weak links, which is the Attorney General, then this might be the time to do it. On the other hand, that's a pretty big move, and it's one that also the lieutenant governor would be effectively doing in support of an attack against a conservative by the House, which he's in conflict with over school choice, property tax relief, and a host of other issues.
Gotcha. So all eyes on Austin tomorrow, Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah, and the one thing I've seen people bandying about 2/3 in the House. That's not my understanding of it. My understanding, quorum is 2/3. So if you don't have at least 1/3 plus 2/3 plus 1 who are willing to be there, then they can block it. But I do not, I may be wrong on this, but I do not believe it requires a 2/3 vote, but perhaps I'm wrong on that. That's the only part my belief is that it's a simple majority, just like in the US House. That is, it's a majority of votes. So you don't need 2/3 you don't need 100 votes. You would just need 75.
That's what I kept seeing that too. And I think the couple places I kept coming back to is that it was a simple majority in the House to advance the articles, but then the trial would require.
The trial's 2/3. Yeah, the trial is 2/3 of senators present. That is explicit. Yeah, but in the House, my understanding is a simple majority. All I've seen people the only way that 2/3 makes sense is a quorum in the House, as we learned in 2021 with Democrats, does require that 100 individuals be there. So in theory, if 50 Republicans decided not to be there, they could keep that session from ever occurring.
Gotcha. So that 2/3 thing, if they decided to break quorum, if they walked out or something, or if they just didn't show when this was on the calendar or something like that. Okay. This might be something for TV. So, just I'm thinking along the lines of, we don't have a ton of track record for this in the Texas legislature. No,
Texas has had 2 impeachments under the Constitution of 1876. One in 1917 of Governor Jim Paw Ferguson, and then one in 1975 of a district judge. The latter of which was not particularly controversial. He had been involved in embezzlement and other crimes. The Ferguson impeachment back in 1917 was controversial, but that was over 100 years ago.
Gotcha. Anything I haven't asked that you would want to add, you think is relevant, important to share with the audience?
Well, I think one thing, I think the one point that I think keeps coming up to me is, regardless of what the House, regardless of what the Speaker wants to do, the reality is that we just did a public opinion poll, actually, which was a technical poll, with Jason Whiteley up at WFAA, where Ken Paxton is viewed favorably by 2/3 of Texas Republicans, and only unfavorably Ken Paxton is viewed favorably by 2/3 of Texas Republican primary voters and only unfavorably by 1/7, meaning an overwhelming majority of Texas Republican primary voters like Ken Paxton. And unlike the general public, these individuals are fully well aware of all of his legal troubles and ethical troubles and still support him because they like the conservative policies that he promotes. So it would be very difficult for a Republican lawmaker to effectively say, I'm going to impeach a Republican attorney general who's pursued a very conservative policy agenda, and who in May of 2022 won over 2/3 of the vote in the Republican primary.
It's more personal animosity and embarrassment that drives it than any sort of electoral, reason that they don't like him.
Yeah, it's not. Electoral, it's suicide for a lot of Republicans. Unless an overwhelming majority of the Republican Party comes down on the side of impeachment, the three Republicans on this committee who voted in favor of impeachment have now put targets on their back for the 2024 Republican primary. Now, to the extent to which they have the cover of a host of other Republicans also voting for impeachment, and the governor and the lieutenant governor favoring it, then they're in less trouble. On the other hand, if at the end of the day, the Republicans don't even support the articles of impeachment, then these three individuals have walked out on a plank, and they're all alone, and there's sharks circling underneath.